So Matt, thank you very much for kicking us off. And I know that our panelists have some reactions, and they're chomping at the bit probably to comment on different things. So I'm going to ask you to just remember sort of what one of those points might be. And I want to take a minute to just introduce you all to our panel.
I thought you were going to say, remember you're being recorded.
It's more fun that way.
Yeah, I mean, aren't we eternally being recorded with tweeting and so forth? So let's see. First, I'll start from my left and make my way along. So to my immediate left here is Will Bunker, who's one of the co-founders of GrowthX, which is an initiative in San Francisco. Very interesting model. GrowthX describes itself as a trust network of innovators and investors. And in addition to its VC fund, Will's going to tell us about how their market acceleration program works with select startups to really help them thoughtfully get into the market. A little bit of background about Will. Will was one of the founders of what was called oneandonly.com, which ultimately is Match.com, which was sold. And sold, and also at the time one of the top 100 internet sites, and obviously very successful. Will is a really prolific angel investor, and so he's worked with a lot of startups in a very intense way, and he's also led the raising of a micro VC fund called the Silicon Valley Growth Syndicate. So this is Will Bunker, and we're happy to have him here. And then next, we have Ravi Belani. Ravi Belani is a founder of the Alchemist Accelerator, also in San Francisco, and Ravi's managing partner there. Ravi, the Alchemist Accelerator is a venture-backed accelerator that's focused on startups whose customers are enterprise. So it's not, B2C model. It's startups that are going after a B2B model. Among its many accolades, the Alchemist Accelerator was named one of the top 20 U.S. accelerators in 2015 by the Harvard Business Review. I love this. It's sort of like everybody hanging out in the living room. It's great. So Ravi is a very busy guy, and he also has a faculty role at Stanford where he teaches a course called The Spirit of Entrepreneurship in the Management, Science, and Engineering department. Ravi is also an advisor and investor to several startups, and was also formerly at Draper Fisher Jurvetson, one of the big venture firms in the Valley. And next, so I have to warn you about this guy, because this is Jitendra Kavathekar, and Jitendra's my boss. And so I have, Jitendra's agreed for the next hour or so that anything I say or if I pick on him too much, I get a pass. So you guys can help me keep him honest about that. But Jitendra leads Accenture's Open Innovation initiative globally and actually started it. Managing an entrepreneurial and awesome team. Who's on the team? Who's in the room? Very good. Shout it out. All right, awesome. And the mission of the team is really to build a bridge between Accenture clients and this, incredibly rapidly growing supply of innovation, i.e. startups. Jitendra before had a role where he actually also built and led Accenture's digital health initiative. And prior to Accenture, he's been involved in both large companies, scaling disruptive organizations. Some of those large companies are HP, Palm, and Yahoo. And also at startups such as Pixo, where he led the engineering team. And he was at Twiki, where he was president and CEO. And then we have Jonathan Nelson. Jonathan is CEO and founder of Hackers and Founders, which is a community, the largest global community of tech founders, more than 200,000 members in over 100 cities around the world. From Hackers and Founders, more recently, he's launched what's called the Founders Cooperative and an associated accelerator. Cumulatively, The portfolio has reached about a $450 million market cap over about a 4-year period. That's approximately 50 companies, if I have that right. Jonathan is also involved on the advocacy side, and he's member of the SEC Advisory Committee on capital formation for small and medium businesses, working with the White House, Mayor Bloomberg's initiative around startup visa and related activities. So this is our fabulous panel. All right, gentlemen. So does anybody have any burning comments of violent agreement or disagreement in reaction to the report, just to kick things off? Anybody want to go?
Well, I'll tell you, my quick reaction. First of all, I thought that was fantastic. All that data was great. Well, no. Well, I think the most telling takeaway from the thing was that in spite of all the consistent success of all these corporate innovation programs that are being shut down based on externalities. So it's not that corporate innovation has actually, there's no data to show that the corporate innovation programs have been underperforming. In fact, they've been performing very well. It's more that there's these externalities that are preventing things from succeeding. I will say that from my experience, even though there are these deaths of corporate innovation programs, and I know Matt's data shows this as well, the flood of births of new programs is like 2 to 1 on the deaths, and so I also think that the demand for that is very much needed, because there still is, all those programs have been successful. It's just a structural issue around what's prevented it from succeeding. One quick data point that I'll throw out is that, I come from the world of being an evil venture capitalist before, and there's around 40 billion, I think, annually spent on venture. There's about 400 billion spent on corporate R&D, around 10 times as much. And as an accelerator, I'm sort of in the business of funding employees that leave corporates, disgruntled employees, to start the next big thing. So, and when I'm funding them, the big issue that the VCs have before they decide to write a check is if they get a customer. A corporate's going to be a customer. So the corporates actually have a ton of power. And everybody talks about disruption, but when you're a startup, you're really not thinking about disrupting a corporate. You're just thinking about, can a corporate help me? Can I get a procurement event done? And the corporates have tons of resources. So I think fundamentally, even though the takeaway is that there's been all this quote-unquote failure, behind the scenes, the story is actually very strong. Yeah.
So I'm going to ask Jitendra, with some of Accenture's clients who maybe have been talking to you, and
This seems like a very canned question, by the way. Just.
well, we've talked about their experiences and some of the reasons that they're shutting these down or frustrated with their experiences.
Yeah. So because we were talking in the green room before we came here, and I think I had a bit of a cynical view that I laid on Matt and Will. This was Ravi before you guys came in. That a lot of we all have personal views on what's happening, and the data is great, and the timing is amazing to have this conversation right now. So that was cool. But I was kind of equating it to if you look at Hollywood, right? Just bear with me for a second. If you look at Hollywood, the whole kind of ecosystem there is built to take creative energy and then create movies and create content and then get it out there through a distribution mechanism that have been pretty well tried and true, and there's a somewhat predictable way to take content out to market and hit the theaters and make a lot of money for the producers. So it's a machine, right? And the question is it a machine? Let's just take Silicon Valley. Is it a machine in Silicon Valley to take creative energy through technical kind of contribution, to innovate on technologies and innovate on capabilities, to take it through this machinery that we have, let's say in Silicon Valley, to take it through some sort of exit so that the producers, the investors, are able to kind of make a great opportunity for themselves, their investors, as well as the ecosystem, because we love this stuff, right? So it's not a bad thing, it's a good thing. And if you buy into that, right, if you bought into that kind of synonymous thing, then the accelerators, in my mind, are there to help investors be able to choose the better companies because, hey, this guy came out of Y Combinator, must be a safe bet. Yes, I want to put money into this startup. Or it came out of this great accelerator, Citrix Accelerator, back when it was there, or Alchemist. there's a channel to kind of get and tee up these startups for deal flow for the VCs. Not a bad thing, but when you look at when you bring the corporate conversation into it, the question is what's in it for the corporates? Like the so what of the corporate side of it, right? So why should somebody care? They should care, and Ravi's absolutely right. If it's not that corporates are there only to mentor and help, they're actually a distribution mechanism for the great technologies and the great entrepreneurs to get their innovations to market in a way that the corporates can add value also to it. So the dream gets even bigger when you kind of see these entrepreneurs get to market that way. And I think that the interesting conversation, just to finish, the interesting conversation is, so where's the corporates in this conversation? Because the data is showing that there's a lot of churn in that. Sorry, just keep.
No, let me quickly say, we did an event in LA last week with the AT&T Foundry, which is AT&T's network of incubators, the CTO of Fox Studios, and the head of open innovation from Warner Brothers. And the funniest comment about that parallel, and I was laughing when you said that the first time, and you didn't know this, but they love this analogy so much more that Jitendra should just go down and walk around in Hollywood because he'll get money. So they love that analogy so much so that film funds now behave like venture funds. They set up separate LPs, they have a high-risk end of the portfolio, and a couple things they consider to be singles and doubles, and they are behaving like their VC.
So in a past life, I was actually an emergency room nurse. I get bored easily. Went back to school for software engineering and then got into startup finance and ecosystems, blah, blah, blah. I actually, coming as a biologist to this industry and trying to figure out how does it work? Where is the data that shows me that I'll be a successful entrepreneur? What's my chance of being an entrepreneur and having a successful company? Oh, all the startups die. I'm like, okay, well, how many? It's like 90%. Oh my gosh, it's an epidemic. What do they die of? We don't know. Well, what does the success look like? Well, it returns 20x the original investment of the VC. I'm like, but that's not my definition of success as an entrepreneur. And so I've what we've seen in our network is that you have these small little entrepreneur things. They kind of get together in these events and these little pools, these little ecosystems, and they start spitting out things. I don't know what it is. It's a widget. It's a thing. And then occasionally they evolve into products. And the little creatures kind of crawl legs and come out onto the sand. And then sometimes they start selling the product quickly and the whole thing starts to fly. And then, I have no idea, you inject capital into it, it gets kind of big and starts to, bzzz, lightning happens, the God, the Buddha, the Dharma event happens, and then they turn into this giant, beautiful unicorn that goes around eating other startups and shitting gold all over the place, which goes back into the ecosystem with like startup pieces, and then they kind of clump together and they start throwing out little things again.
That was good. That's it. Yes.
So I would like to actually get the larger corporates closer to my portfolio companies because here, why don't you one? Here, nice horsey. But I also, the model that I've seen before, and I think Ravi's probably seen this as well, is that VCs would tend to talk with corporate executives on a golf course and they say, "Oh, what are your problems?" And then the VC is like, "Oh, okay," and they go out and they make a bunch of investments and they come back 5 years later to the corporate and say, "Oh, would you like to buy this startup from me? It's only $1 billion." Ding. And I think that's probably a couple $100 million too expensive and about 5 years too late. And so how do we get problems from big companies that are really good and juicy and generally significant instead of photo sharing in front of a bunch of entrepreneurs? So if anybody knows, let me know.
Will, do you have any comments about the report, or I want to add on to this?
Well, I mean, it's funny. This is a really hard business model. I mean, when I think about it, I'm an industrial engineer, and I look at everything as how does it work? And for something to be a great business, it has to have two things. It needs to have long-term capital gain, because that's where you make your real money and it doesn't get taxed away. And then it also needs to have great cash flow so that you don't die before you get to that event. And incubators and accelerators have a dearth of cash flow that is shocking and, terrible. And so I think that that's why people pull the plug on them, is because that 7-year horizon to find out if you're right. I mean, think about it. I go to work every day. I've been doing it for 3 years now. I won't know if I'm right for 4 more years. And can you imagine the conversation I have with my wife? No, I'm right. Well, how do you know you're right? well, I just think I'm right. I think I'm right. By God, and then the worst thing is that all around you is evidence that you're wrong. Well, that company went under. Well, that company went. But I got this other one. And she goes, but you love the one that just died. I said, well, we all loved that one. Yeah, it was beautiful. So it's really, really hard because the feedback loop, unlike a consumer startup, because I was in the dating business, we could push out a change, and within an hour, I could tell you how much more or less money we were going to make. If I do something different now, 7 years from now, I'll be able to look back and think, I think that was it, maybe, if I don't forget between now and then.
Great, thanks, Will. So what I'd like to ask each of you to do, and Will, I'll start with you, is I'd like you just to talk about your respective organizations, so GrowthX, Alchemist, et cetera. Talk about what the initial vision was, what changes have you made over time, if any, and if there's sort of a particularly unique aspect that you can describe.
So, I got into this business because I really honestly want to help people. I had a lot of people help me when I was starting my company and when I was starting out. And I sincerely want to help other people on that journey. Well, the first thing you run into is, I raised a small fund. I started making small investments. I have 68 companies. And you go, oh my God, I'm not a piece of software. Like, I don't scale. Like, I can't help 68 companies. If I remembered 68 people's names, that would be a frickin' miracle. And so, you start to go, well, why can't I help more people? Well, I can't help more people because to help people, you actually have to have a business model and people on the payroll and people that understand the startup's problems. And so the last 2-3 years, GrowthX has been grappling with how do we create a model that allows us to be more helpful than just write a check and so go get them, boys, or girls. A lot of them are girls. And our first innovation there was we hired an in-house staff of people that are sales and marketing experts that can help grow a company very rapidly when it works. A lot of times it doesn't work. And then the question is, well, how do you pay for that? That's a pretty big head count. So the one thing that's different about our fund is the LPs have agreed that if our staff is helping a company in a way that the entrepreneur is willing to give us equity for, they'll pay their salaries to get that equity into the fund. And so then that unlocks our ability to spend fund capital on actually helping an entrepreneur versus we write a check first and we don't help every company because not everything's a good fit with the team we have. But that was innovation one. And then innovation two is we're coming out with a boot camp that's not a software boot camp, but a boot camp for people that would know how to grow a company. And then we're going to use that business model of teaching people digital marketing, sales and marketing, design to allow us to hire staff in ecosystems around the world so that we have a worldwide talent pool that we can help startups with. And we're launching that this summer, and it's GrowthX Academy.
Great. Thanks. Ravi?
So Alchemist, as Sandy said, we are a venture-backed accelerator that does enterprise startups, so companies that monetize from enterprises. So our backers are many of the Sandhill funds, Sandhill Road funds like DFJ, Khosla, Foundation Capital, Mayfield, USVP, and then also corporates, Cisco, Salesforce, Siemens, Tyco, and SAP via Sapphire. And so the way that we got started in terms of the origins, it's sort of interesting because I used to be a venture capitalist at DFJ, and people right now look at me a little bit curiously because I used to have the dream job. I was on Sand Hill Road writing $5 million checks into startups, and now I write $30,000 checks into 100 companies. So we have 100 companies now that have graduated. We've had 12 classes graduate, but many of my old VC friends don't get it because I sort of had the life. And now this is sort of it's a lot more work, but it's a lot more fun. So the origins of Alchemist was actually we started out as an entrepreneurship education program called the Alchemist series that was out of the Harvard Club of San Francisco. It was called Alchemist because it's about transforming technical alums into entrepreneurs, CS alums from Harvard. And then it spun out of the Harvard Club and it served all the Ivy Plus schools. And we did and when I was at DFJ, I was moderating some events. They liked how I moderated. They invited me back, and we did a 6-week structured program. We didn't think about it as an accelerator. It was just a 6-week program. And we got all these phenomenal enterprise founders that came, all these VPs from Oracle and Cisco and SAP. And we said, why are you doing this 6-week Harvard Club program? And they said, well, we don't need to raise $5 million. We only need like $250K or $500K. And all the accelerators are really consumer focused. And so then that was the light bulb moment behind which we said, okay, there's an opportunity to build a program just for the enterprise founders. And if you're not encumbered by history, what would that look like? And so our program is a longer program. It's a 6-month program. Sometimes it goes for 9 or 12 months. It heavily focuses on sales and selling. And all of our teams are technical. So we fund the technical teams that need to learn how to sell. And we've been having a ton of fun. We think the enterprise is really sexy. So one interesting thing, I guess, about Alchemist is that we have funded a lot of big data companies, and that is the bread and butter, as like enterprise SaaS type of stuff. We've also had quantum computing companies. We have an antimatter company that's trying to go to Mars. We have some phenomenal deep tech that and it is amazing how profound the innovations can be at even the seed stage. And I'm always blown away at the caliber of the companies that come out. So it's a small tidbit. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so from an open innovation perspective, both Sandy, you and Elizabeth talked about open innovation a little bit. And to personalize it for me, I'm kind of like a Silicon Valley mutt, right? I kind of been at a lot of companies, and big ones, small ones, and been around for 20 years in the Valley and 5 years outside of the Valley in tech. I committed to myself that my next job is going to be a platform that I'm going to help develop, and I'm going to live within, right? And it's going to be a meaningful thing. And indeed, it's kind of turned out that way. If you look at Accenture today, this company called Accenture, it's a 400,000 person company, right? It's huge. We serve industries, all the industries. Every industry you can think of that has a significant presence, we serve them, and we serve the global 2,000 companies in those industries, right? So we're in the middle of all of enterprise and governments, and happens to be NGOs as well, and foundations and things like that also. So you're right, it's prime time, right? And within prime time, you're in the spotlight of the innovation part of it, where every client is trying to figure out either something's going to take me out, somebody's going to take me out because something's going to come out of Silicon Valley and Uberize me and I'm toast, or something's going to disrupt my business and I got to figure it out before my competitors do, and digest that disruption and figure out how I'm going to work through that. Or guess what? There's just incremental innovations that I should be able to tap into and partner with. Like, I shouldn't have to build that. I don't want to spend the money to build that because this entrepreneur has $50 million from VCs to go build that. Why am I building that? I've got $2 million from my VP to go do that. I'd rather use other people's money and partner with a startup, right? So we're in a tornado of that right now. Corporates are trying to figure this out. And then within that innovation thing is, all right, there's something called open innovation in this company called Accenture that's in the middle of the enterprise universe that is trying to figure out how to create that bridge between the startup world and this corporate world, this enterprise corporate world, right? It's a bridge. And it's not a matchmaking service. It's not a Shark Tank, scenario. It's not a tour of Silicon Valley, right? It's not that. We are against those things from the small team that we have, and where do we want to spend our time? There's reasons to have tours of Silicon Valley. There's reasons to have hackathons. There's really good reasons to do that. But where we're focusing on, and as we learned over 3 years, we're in our third year, what we learned is it's not that the problem, it's not that the solutions aren't out there, right? Like Steve Jobs said when, the ad for iPhone when it came out and the App Store, there's an app for that, right? Which means that there's a solution for that. The real question is, what is the problem that you're trying to solve? And when you apply that simple idea to corporate, Global 2000, what is the digital transformation opportunity that Accenture can help a client with? It could be Nike, could be AT&T, could be Vodafone, it could be Kaiser, it could be in any of these industries. These digital transformations, that is our target. That is what this team spends its time trying to figure out with our clients in the conversations that we have. Once you understand that, once we understand that, there's a startup for that. Or there's 20 startups for that, frankly. And there's ways to engage with these startups so we can actually help our corporates kind of get to that next level. And that's how we look at open innovation at Accenture. Of course, to do that, the first mile of this bridge, the first mile is to engage with the ecosystems and to engage with Alchemist and engage with the VCs and engage with the entrepreneurs, engage with that community and find meaningful ways to connect and understand and start digesting what's out there. That's the kind of first part of the journey. The last part of the journey is actually knowing what the clients are. We've been working with these clients for decades. We know them. They know us. Families know each other. That is our business. That's what we've done for decades. And the middle part of that is the hard part, which is, so you got a technology, you got a problem. You don't just throw a technology at the problem. You got to translate that technology through some sort of way to kind of articulate a use case or a proof of concept of using some AI machine learning algorithm to solve what? Okay, some healthcare thing. You got to do that translation, and that's what we do, and that's why we want to have this event here, is because that's what this organization does. The Liquid Studios does. We do rapid prototyping, working with startups to not modify startups' code. We're not in that business. We take your APIs and build use cases on top. So that's that middle part. It's translating those raw technologies into use cases that the CFOs and the CDOs and the CTOs of our clients say, now I understand what that technology does. I'm going to buy that solution because that's the problem you're solving for me. And so it's a completely gratifying thing personally to kind of build that platform and kind of be in those types of conversations.
Great.
So for me, I've kind of ended up at the opposite end of the spectrum. I moved to Silicon Valley 10 years ago with this crazy idea that I was going to have to build 10 companies if one of those was going to survive and be successful. So I was doing that. I started these events, and in 2008 and 2009, we started to see just tons of underemployed engineers coming to our events, and they were underemployed engineers tend to make widgets. And I think there has been a huge movement in people interested in entrepreneurship globally. The cost of computing, according to Moore's law, is decreasing exponentially, and the power of computing is increasing exponentially. You can now get a Raspberry Zero. It's a new type of little mini computer. It's $5, and it runs a full version of like a desktop Linux. Which means that in emerging markets, you have a ton of people who have been reading about startups for years who can now build startups. And that's where our global network has just kind of exploded. Problems in the ecosystem is that the capital for those startups, the food, essentially is within 30 miles of where we're sitting tonight. And that capital tends to come from people that you know. And if you're an entrepreneur in Guadalajara, Mexico, and you have an amazing idea and you're building Alibaba for your family's car parts shop, and you are now the platform for all of the automotive industry in Mexico, that's great, but how would you, for instance, get capital on Sand Hill Road if they don't habla español? And so what we're actually trying to do at Hackers and Founders is solve those problems. Our mission statement is how to make life suck 34% less for founders in Silicon Valley and around the world. Because there's a lot of suck as an entrepreneur. And so how do we help just remove the obstacles, the complaints that we hear at entrepreneurs at the bar in our events? How do we solve those problems? Which is why we're doing what we're doing. So our model is startups pay common stock into a shared pool. They own 20% of the pool, we own 30% of the pool, and then half of the pool we sell to angel investors. And we've worked with 55 companies so far. We're trying to triple in size right now with a hardware program. We're a program in Berlin, which just kind of emerged. Guys saying, dude, we need a co-op program. Dude. Mexico, dude, we need a co-op program. And there's enough community around that we just built a community co-op program around there. Our hardware program, the coolest stuff I've been seeing, all has a bit of hardware attached recently. But hardware is hard, quoth Sand Hill Road. And so how do we help take the suck out of being a hardware entrepreneur? And so we're having soft landings for our companies. If you need precision engineering, you have it in Berlin. If you need automated testing and that sort of stuff, Guadalajara, Mexico happens to be fantastic at nearshoring that sort of stuff. And we're going to be opening an office in Shenzhen, China, so we can truly globalize our very small 2 to 5 person companies really as a service. And that's what they pay us common stock for.
Great.
So does anybody here work for Cisco? Good, I can do this then. Okay, so for me, the answer for why I do what I do comes back to something that happened to me in the dot-com bubble, which is an interesting place to say this because we're sitting in a building that has a great, very storied history if you don't know it. But I was on the founding team of a startup called the Patent and Licensing Exchange, which raised $30 million in about 1998 from SoftBank and others, and we blew it all. And it was fun to blow. But during that time, I went to a red herring conference and something happened to me. So for me to help you see what happened at that red herring conference, I have to do an impersonation for you. So I'm going to just put this down. You see, what's needed here is a degree of communication. We need to bring people together. And that's only through Cisco hardware that we can make this happen. You see, John Chambers made this about missionary zeal. He made it about something bigger than Cisco hardware. It was always about putting people together and putting systems together. And he did it in a way, I've never actually done the John Chambers impersonation for John Chambers. But I would be fascinated to do
Well,
it.
I'm sure it'll be up on YouTube in 30 seconds.
We'll find a way. I've done it for a bunch of John's team, and it is intriguing. Anyway, I think the coolest part about the way he approached these things, he gave a talk at a Tech America function while I was there about the Church of Silicon Valley and the way that Lou Platt received the Cisco team every Friday afternoon for years to help them figure out what they were going to do. And so I think that Church of Silicon Valley is what keeps bringing me back.
Great. You know, one of the things that I'm curious for some of you, I mean, you have sort of this international community that keeps growing, and I think it just on the community side, not necessarily the accelerator, but there was some data point about it's doubling every 8 months, and I'm curious for Ravi and for Will also, you know, how does sort of the startups from outside the U.S., you know, how are they sort of reaching out and making their way to you to the extent that they are and that's a fit?
So I'll run into a lot of international people who just bought a ticket and show up. Like my favorite one is this, he looks like a manga character, but he's beautiful hair and very swooping. He's from Saudi Arabia. And so immediately I'm like, okay, this guy's cool. He's got to have a story. And he wrote an app that helped people in a very difficult culture express their feelings. And he just bought a ticket, and he's here, and he came here, and he reached out to me and said, hey, I want to meet you. And I always try to set aside a little bit of time just because there's serendipity involved. And, you know, so I run into a lot of people. I gave him a small check, but the advice I gave him was like, well, we've got these 2 princes that want to give us money, and we're going to go back on the plane, and we're going to get that money. I said, don't get on that plane. I said, you call them up, and you tell him you met the founder of what became Match.com. He loves your startup. There's still a little bit of room if they want some. They called me up the next day. They go, it worked. It worked. He wired us the money. You know, so yes, it's just fun. I mean, there's just a lot of that happens. I wish we could be more intentional about it, and that's one of the things I love about what Jonathan's doing and 500 Startups is doing, is they're really starting to reach out. And I'm not going to stop until we have a presence in every startup ecosystem on the planet as a mission.
That's great.
I think that's this isn't on. I think that's great. So our accelerator is 30% international, but we bring everybody here. Here's the conundrum: is that if you go to a Valley VC, with a few exceptions, and you say, hey, if you fund me, I will move, they will not fund you. They'll view you as a European company or as a MENA company or Latin American company, and they'll punt you to their partners in those regions. But if you come here and you say, we're an American company, and we have operations in Europe, and we have operations in MENA, they might fund you, and then if you fund you, guess what? You are an American company. Okay, so our philosophy is, and that's partly why we run a longer program, is that we want to bring everybody here, have them get acclimated to the United States, have them close a couple customers, and then present themselves as a U.S. company. Now, how do they discover us? the valley's been built by immigrants. That's there's very few things that are correlated with entrepreneurial success. There's really only two, and one of them is not coming from the region is correlated, and it's partly those people just find you. So the world's flat. There's so much information out there, but we get phenomenal applications from just people that just discover us through random ways. And then, fortunately, as our network grows, we have more people that keep referring people in. So it's just been happening organically to date.
Yeah, great. And Jonathan, in terms of the community and the reasons for that growth, I think the barriers to entry are so low. So how are you thinking about that when you think about sort of the accelerator and folks sort of having a franchise or the equivalent in other countries?
So I actually think that we should be trying to push as many resources from Silicon Valley out to the rest of the world. If we have all of our companies in Mexico are Delaware Cs, and there is an ever-increasing number of companies whose headquarters happens to be my home address, and because they just, on their company corporate application, is like 62440.
There's no liability there at all.
And so we actually try to build this hub and spoke system. We'll bring somebody in to actually speak. The head of the patent office in Silicon Valley is going to come and speak in a week and a half. And we're going to live stream it to any of the companies and any of the portfolios that actually want to ask questions. So we do a lot of video conferencing. Mm-hmm. We also try to work with a lot of companies that are in their own market, trying to grow customer bases in their own market, and how do we help those companies scale across the Spanish-speaking world, for instance. 10% of the world's economy speaks Spanish. That's a significant market, and how many venture funds are there or programs are there to actually help companies hopscotch from country to country? There isn't any. So that's the problems that the entrepreneurs are telling us that we're trying to solve. How do we help those companies grow?
Great. I want to pause for a minute because and just see if anybody has any questions. We've been sort of going at a clip, but we can have a dialogue here. And if anybody has any questions, otherwise we'll just keep moving on. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Does anyone have any comments on the status of both incubators in China, accelerators in China?
Status of incubators in China.
Everything's growing fast in China. You're looking at one of the greatest industrialization events of humankind ever. And even if it blows up, which everything does eventually, it's still a massive transformation that's unstoppable.
There's Chairman Xi has in their 5-year plan has been saying entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship, entrepreneurship. And so their model of an incubator is a co-working space. And if we build it, sometimes entrepreneurs come. So we've been asked, for instance, by Guangzhou, China, where Shenzhen is how do we actually help build these communities? So our goal is to try to build that community, because I firmly believe that entrepreneurs grow in communities, or at least it sucks less. But there is an amazing appetite for entrepreneurship in China. There is actually an amazing number of hardware innovations happening in Shenzhen. I was just mouth agape when I saw some of this stuff, like, oh my God, that's so cool. And if I figure I've done that enough times over the years that usually when I do that, about 2.5 years later, the thing shows up in the New York Times. So I went to Shenzhen and said, oh my God, that's cool. Dozens and dozens of times in 3 days.
Great.
I can add a little bit to that. There are, I think, a number of interesting programs, but the ones that seem to be able to put down roots and have the potential to create a legacy, I think it's not a coincidence, are the ones that have a set of strategics involved. So if you look at the Lab 360 program, which is tied to a Chinese company that's concerned about the microelectronics supply chain, is plugging that into a bunch of its companies and is going to have an ability to scale those companies up. And so I think it's strategic. The other thing that I think is intriguing is InnoSpring has Kleiner Perkins involved and things like that. So I think there are deeper ties for some of them than others.
Just a quick question: How is your organization funded?
Membership.
Totally by membership?
Well, this study was funded by grants, so we do some projects on top of that.
Great. So I'm interested if you could talk about how corporations are involved in your programs. And I think it's varying degrees in some cases, but can you help us understand sort of how that works and how they engage with the startups and or engage just with each other in the context of your programs?
Sure, I can kick it off just because we're a corporate-backed accelerator, so we have different tiers of corporates. The most inner circle is that we have corporates that give us the capital that we give to the founders, and many of our backers have backed us repeatedly, including Cisco, who we love. John Chambers is great. Cisco's funded us now 3 times. We
love you too, Ravi.
And it's interesting because many of our backers, like Cisco, they have their own accelerator, and then they'll also be funding us. They partly do that because they've acquired 2 companies, one of which was a joint effort with Hackers and Founders and Alchemist. Sonata just got acquired by Cisco. So they've acquired 2 of our companies. All of our backers have, and our founders don't have to do anything with our backers. The backers don't have any rights to invest or any rights to acquire. But by virtue of the program and the ecosystem, they get privileged relationships, and then that tends to lead to things. So many of our backers we've had 13 funding events that have been from our backers, and a whole bunch of other partnerships and things that have evolved. So the tightest relationship is somebody that's actually a backer of Alchemist. Then we have these different concentric circles, including Accenture, who's one of our core partners and is a strong supporter of ours, even though they're not an official backer, as well as, for example, Microsoft. We're housed out of Microsoft. We used to work out of Yammer. And so we have many corporates that are strategic partners, and that's usually just, as was mentioned earlier, it's a very cash-lean business when you're running an accelerator versus other models, and so it does really heavily rely upon the ecosystem for support, both in kind and in cash.
Great.
Maybe add some comments on how we engage with corporates. We do partner with others to run accelerators. We've done the FinTech Accelerator in New York City, the FinTech Innovation Lab, for, I don't know, is it 6 years or so now? Very successful program. And we also have a FinTech Innovation Lab in London and in Hong Kong as well, so it's kind of the financial centers. And that model is where corporates are involved in helping select the cohorts coming in. So the banks, the chief digital officers, the CTOs are involved. From Morgan Stanley, from Amex, from a variety of the banks and capital market companies to help select the cohort of startups coming in, and then they actually mentor them through that 4-month or 6-month program. And so our way of engaging on that is an active engagement with the corporates, because those are our clients at the end of the day. That's where we make our business, is to work with them. And it's a great program, and the companies come out of that with a better understanding of the actual business that they're trying to sell to. They have a senior level person at a corporate that is involved personally. This is not a delegated thing. This is a personal involvement. If you're a chief CTO of a bank, you are personally involved in mentoring this company, which obviously creates a great opportunity for that entrepreneur. And we've just started also with, we finished our first year with healthcare in New York, the New York Digital Health Accelerator as well. So that's on the accelerator side. But if you look at what we do from a day-to-day basis with corporates in general when we're engaging with them, we did one, just to give you a sense of how we run our what we call open innovation as a service model. We work with a bank, and in this part of the region, this bank is the largest bank in that region. And one of their businesses within the bank is to do agri-banking, to bank to farmers, to give loan to farmers for capital, for seed, to buy new property, to sell their property, et cetera. It's a bank for farmers, and it's a large part of their business. So imagine when the bank is saying, we don't understand how, we need to figure out what IoT, Internet of Things, those technology impacts to farms and farmers. As that comes, what does that mean for banking in the future? Right? What does that mean from a bank who's giving a loan to a farmer? So as the farms over time are going to become the digitized farm or the precision agriculture, and you have sensors that understand the moisture levels in your soil, that understand the nutrient levels in the soil, you have drones, you have satellite information that understand the characteristics of your farm business, the yield that you're going to get from the crops. the quality of the seed and whether as the crops are growing, and if they're tilting too much, it's unhealthy, but if they're not tilting, it's healthy, and you have robotics that are efficiently going through the farm, right? This is a 10-year, 15-year type of transformation. The bank is trying to figure out, well, what does that mean to our risk scores? Like, how do we assign risk to farmer A versus farmer B that looks the same, they have the same amount of acreage, they have the same crops, but the characteristics are different in the soil, right? So the startup part of the story is these companies, these amazing companies that are doing the sensors and are doing the drones and are doing all the AI techniques around understanding that data are proliferating across the farms, but then the large corporates are trying to figure out what does that mean for their core business. And if they don't figure this out, they're going to go out of business, right? Because somebody else is going to figure it out for them. So that journey is a journey that we go through every day with our clients. That's what we do. And we help that bank go through their digital transformation. And it's not, in that part of our business, so we help run accelerators, but that part of our business, it's not that we're here to accelerate a startup through its journey. That's not what that's about. It's actually helping our clients accelerate through their journey through the partnerships with startups, right? So it's the startups are accelerating the client. The startups are accelerating the corporate to get to that end state. That's the way we look at that. And we see that a huge opportunity that really is untapped, and that's what we're going after.
Great.
We're actually inviting a company that's building the Internet of Cows to join the co-op. They're putting an RFID tracking chip with GPS on a cow, and knowing where a cow is and monitoring its ear temperature, you can actually get to the cow when it's sick and before it's half dead, and you can move it out. They think that they can actually decrease veterinary costs by like 50-60%, and improve the quality of beef and raise the price on their beef.
Great.
Yeah, in fact, losing cows is not unheard of, or getting cows stolen is not unheard of. So it helps there. And you kind of want your cows to be hefty and fatter. So it's kind of, we called it the fat bit, because you actually want them to not move around that much. So the grazing patterns and everything are very important, and tracking that and all that. So.
Interesting kind of dots connecting thing here is next week, the U.S. Secretary of Energy, Ernie Moniz, is hosting about, 30 or 40 ministers of energy in San Francisco. And at that forum, they're going to be having a conversation about how to make the Paris goals into something tangible, including a startup forum. So what's interesting about that is most of the world sort of said, we should do things like composting. It turns out composting releases methane, and methane is the worst of the greenhouse gases. So now we have to go back and reverse engineer 20 years of encouragement that we've been working on, because composting has been destroying the atmosphere for a couple of decades. So it'd be interesting to see how this startup forum goes for the level of problems they're trying to attack. Because if you're not talking about gigaton level solutions, it's not interesting enough.
Yeah.
For me, the reason that we're actually interested in connecting with corporates, and we're trying to, in our own way, teach corporates how to acquire and partner with startups. We're talking to GE right now about an innovation challenge where we'd find 1 or 3 problems, and then hold some events in front of innovators and entrepreneurs, and then the corporate can pick 3 or 4 teams that they want to back, and then they meet by every 2 weeks with this team, and at the end of 6 months, the goal would be the corporate would either become a customer, say no thank you, or they would acquire the company for $1 to $2 million per person. And if we can get a tiny little bit in margin, and if we can actually help drive faster innovation to startups, I can sell to a global community. If you solve this corporate's problem, you might become a millionaire in 6 months. I can sell that all day long. And it's kind of this crowdsourced innovation concept. But in Latin America, M&A is really non-existent. And so how do you teach investors how to invest in entrepreneurs if the entrepreneur really can't promise the investor that you'll be able to sell your stock again to El Google, years later? And so we're thinking about that as well, and how do we get them involved, these big unicorns involved into grazing on the ecosystem. But I think that they're really an integral part of the ecosystem. And the weird thing is 85% of all the world's mergers and acquisitions happen within 30 miles of where we're sitting tonight, generally through someone that knows someone. And so how do we actually create those hurdles, create those bars? I think innovation teams are a huge part of that.
Great. So it's crystal ball time. What I'm interested to hear from each of you is your take on, what will accelerators look like in 5 years? Will we even have them? Will they be called something else? And sort of what are the emerging trends? Do you think there's going to be more of a focus on even, pre-company formation? So is this going to just go early and earlier stage? Or do you think it's going to be a shift towards later stage, and there's going to be more activity on that end?
We're going to accelerate deep thoughts.
Okay. Great. So who wants to take a first cut at this?
Well, I was actually inspired by I was inspired by what Jitendra said earlier about for Hollywood, because I do think the Hollywood model of how Hollywood creates creative innovations might be where Silicon Valley actually ends up going. I think you're going to have both. So if I had to answer the question directly, I think both extremes are going to get bigger. The reason why people do Alchemist, we give $36,000 to companies. Okay, and we have quantum computers, we have antimatter companies, we also have big data companies. Nobody does it for the cash. Okay, the reality is that everybody does it because they want to be part of the ecosystem. And what's happening behind the scenes is that we're trying to put together a whole bunch of resources to help a startup out in sort of the way that Hollywood assembles a movie by not having, it's not the VC model, you're putting together a lot of different ecosystem parts. So I actually think it is going to be the Uberization or whatever of venture, where instead of having these traditional models where you build these 10-year funds and you have these calcified storied firms on one street that are supposed to do everything, that where you have like 5 partners and those partners are supposed to source, build, exit, it'll become a distributed model. Where a company will come in and it'll be a lot more personalized and modular, and you'll plug in your different pieces, and the economics will also be a lot more distributed and fair. And I think you're going to have a higher velocity of things. It's sort of like a combination of what Hollywood does right now. So at least that's how we're seeing it, because I think the pace of innovation is not going to stop. It's going to continue to grow exponentially. Everything Jonathan said before is true. So I think these trends are not secular blips. They're going to be huge trends. I think everybody's going to be in on that.
I have to say, I too was inspired by what Jitendra said, but I would just say the grass is never greener in Los Angeles. And that's literally true.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that either. And I'm not sure if I agree with the direction Hollywood is going.
Yeah, it's
and I don't want us to go in that direction full bore, right? I think we need to be a little bit more.
There are at least 3 case studies.
Aren't you excited about X-Men? It's coming out this week.
Yeah, for sure. There are at least 3 cases of groups that are pre-seed and that actually do the company formation. So then the group in Seattle that actually has the name and has for a decade had the name the Accelerator Corporation actually does all the company formation and pulls in all the in-licensing that they form companies around and create management teams. Versant does this as well, directly creates companies. There's a group in Menlo Park called The Foundry. They decide each project they're going to create, and I think they have 4 venture partners that invest in each project, and they don't build one until they've got a strategic at the back end saying, yes, we would potentially bet on an inflection point in that one. Yeah. And so that model, I think, is there. And I think the other thing that, if I'm projecting ahead 5 years, I would say the name that will get tagged to some of these things is venture studio, that there will be more and more venture studios, and they will be directly tied to one or several venture funds, probably several, whether they're corporate or independent, because of the kind of de-risking approach.
So the most interesting thing that I see on the horizon is a non-evil version of Rocket Internet. I mean, they've created more large companies in a year than anyone will in a lifetime. It reminds me of Bill Gross and Idea Lab back in the day. I think that if Henry Ford were building an innovation system, he would break it down into its parts. I mean, there's probably a guy in Costa Rica that's the world's best at Facebook innovation. There's integration. There's probably a guy in Poland that's the world's best at this. I think someone will assemble those parts, and you'll be able to go from an idea to testing with real people to launching it in ever and ever shorter cycles with less capital. It's going to happen, and it's probably going to happen more than once.
Yeah, I agree, and that's where my comment was going to go to. I totally agree with you, Will. I think you look at the speed at which these companies are coming and going, and you look at the speed at which these accelerators are coming and going, and it's getting faster and faster. So I think there's a concept of a pop-up startup,
yeah,
or a pop-up accelerator. where there's a very specific purpose in it. Sure, fueled by great vision, sure, yeah. But a clear problem to solve where there's a huge appetite for that problem to be solved right now. And I think the interesting thing on that for me is the acquisition kind of instinct that corporates have, is probably the right thing to do in a lot of cases, but in some cases probably, kind of misguided. Because, whatever you acquire, we were talking about this, right? So 6 to 9 months to figure out how to acquire this thing, another year and a half to kind of digest it and kind of integrate it and kill it within your company. And next thing you know, your technology that you acquired 3 years ago is out of date anyway. So what did that all add up to? So why not just partner, right? And let it go through its cycle. And so that kind of speed element that Will was talking about, I think we're all talking about, is an interesting part to kind of look at.
That is why we chose the name California Toolworks for the study. It's industrializing the process of creating startups.
It's inevitable.
Great. And so Matt brings us full circle. That's fabulous. So thank you very much, panel. And can you please help me thank this incredible panel and discussion?